Welcome back to the channel, guys. This is Nicholas from Moralis, and this is episode number 8 of our tutorial series where we are cloning RARIBLE using Moralis. In the previous episode, we minted our first NFT using our RARIBLE platform that we are building, and I just wanted to show you that if you go to the dashboard, you will see now a new table called ETH token balance, and here you will actually see the token that you created in the previous episode. And this table will list all the tokens owned by the users of this RARIBLE trading platform. So this we can use to list the tokens owned by the given user, and this is what we are going to do in this episode. If you've enjoyed the series so far, make sure to hit that like button, and without further ado, let's get going. The first thing that we need to do is to create a new button up here in the menu that says My Items. And this will open up the items of the current user. So we can call this BTN My Items, like this. All right, and then we will need a section for it. So we can create a new div, and we can give it an ID of user items, and we can have a page 4 that says My Items, and we can have a div inside, and in here we will list the items of the current user, and we can give it an ID of user items list or something like that. And then we also need a button so that we can close this section if the user no longer wants to view the items. So we can just type close, and we give it an ID of BTN close user items. Okay, then we need to define references to these in our main.js. So let's just do this one. We can go down here and we can create a new section by giving it a comment and say user items, and we can do we can just copy this and paste our ID here, and we can call this user items section, and then we can copy this and do the same for the list. So we copy the ID, we paste it here, and we can just call it user items. And then we can copy the click event of the close button. So we can take this one for the close user info. We can paste it down here, and we can copy the ID of the close button, and we paste it here. And this will hide the user items section like this. Then we can define the button for the opening of this section. So we can call this open user items button, and that will be, we can copy the ID of BTN My Items, and we paste it here. So now we've created references. And let's just do so that on page load that we hide everything. So on init here, we can hide elements. We can copy this, and we hide the user items section. And when we do the init user and checks that if the user is logged in, then we can show the element of the button. So open user items button, and we can also hide it if the user is not logged in. Very good. And then we can define a new function that will handle the logic for opening this section. So we can just copy the open user info here. We can copy this and use this as a template. So we scroll down here and we paste it, and we can call it open user items, and we can remove everything except the show element like this, and this will show the element of user items section, and if the user is not logged in, then we can again log in. Very good. And we can also trigger the opening of this by doing the open user items button dot onClick equals open user items like this. Okay, So now we want to list the items, and to do that we need to write some cloud functions, and we do that by going to our admin and press here cloud functions. And now you might wonder, okay, what am I going to write here? Well, in the documentation we have a section called cloud functions, and this explains how cloud functions work. And basically it's logic run on the server. And here we see an example of how we can define like an endpoint, like an API endpoint. So we can just copy this and we can use this as a template. So let's go here, and instead of average stars, we can have the endpoint called get user items, and it will take a request and it will query the database. And we want to query this table here, ETH token balance. So we can copy the name of it like this, and we paste it here. And we want to use this equal to, and we want to have the contract type equal to ERC721, because the user can own many kinds of different types of tokens, and we only want to list now the ERC721 tokens. So we can filter that, so we only return those. So let's go back here, and we can do on the contract underline type, we can only return this match of ERC721. And then we only want to return items owned by the current user. And we can see this column says owner of. And if we filter on this for the current user, then we can only return the items owned by the current user. So we will do owner underline of, and we will not use the equal to. If we go back to the documentation here under queries, we can see that we have one that is called contained in, and this means that the contents of the given column will match any of the items in a string array in this case. Because this is a string column, and of course it works with any kind of type, but we will use this here that will match any of the addresses linked to the current user, and we can access those in the request. So first of all, we will do query dot contained in, and we will compare the owner of. And if you want to know what's inside the request, you can actually do just a return request and call this function, and you will see what is getting returned, and you will see what you can access in this request. But for the sake of time, let's just do a request, and you can trust me that the request will contain a user, the current user, and that the user object will contain attributes of that user. And in the attributes, there is one attribute called accounts. That is an array of the accounts linked to the current user. And sorry, let me just do this and focus. So no more disturbances. So we will do request user attributes accounts. So now we will list, we will compare all the accounts owned by the current user, and we will compare that to the owner of the given tokens in this table, so that we will only return the tokens owned by the current user. Hope that makes sense. Good. And then we will store that in a results, and we can call this actually query results, because we will do some extra extrapolation here. Because in this table, there are many columns, and we don't want to send all of these columns to the client. For example, we don't want to send the ACL, we don't want to send the timestamps, and so on. So we want to create a new array, and we can call it const results, and set that equal to an empty array. And then we will loop through that, through this query results here. Sorry, here. And then we can return actually the results. And for each item in this query results, we will push items into this results array. So we can do results dot push, and we can push an object that we will now define. and we have access to the things of each row here that is getting returned. So we can push like the ID of the item, and we can access the query results on the current index, and then we will can access the attributes, and inside the attributes we will find all these columns accessed by the respective name. So we want to access the ID, which is the object ID in this case, and we will assign it to ID. So we will do object ID, and now we will store the object ID in this ID here. So we can copy this, and we can do this, I think, 5 times. So first we will store the ID, then we will store the token ID, and this is the token ID here. So that's token underline ID. So token underline ID, and we also want the token address, and that's token underline address. And then we want the symbol, and then we also want the metadata URI that points to the JSON object that contains the additional information about this token. So for example, if we open up this and we open this in a new tab like this, we see the metadata that we created in the previous episode. So we want to send this to the client as well. And like in a production scenario, you would want to extract this on the server. Perhaps when a new row is changed or added into this table, then you can query this on the backend and put this information inside maybe another table. But for the sake of this tutorial series, we will not do that. For prototyping, it will work just fine on doing this on the client. And so we want to do the token URI, and that's token underline URI, I think. Yeah, token underline URI. Very good. And then, so we push all of this inside this array, and then we return the array. So when we call this get user items, we can copy this into the clipboard and we can save this. So while this is updating, we can go back to our Visual Studio Code, and then we can write a new function that will retrieve these things. So we can do a new function called load user items and set that equal to an asynchronous function. And inside here, we will call our cloud function, and we will do that by calling const, and we will do owned items equal awaits moralis.cloud.run, and this is how where you paste the name of the cloud function that we want to run. And when this has finished, the results array that we defined in our cloud function will now be, the contents will be in the owned items. And we can just console.log this so that we can prove that this is actually true. So let's just call this load user items function on the load here, load user items, and then we can see in the console what we get back. So let's go back to here, RARIBLE. We can open up our console, and then we refresh. Let's see here. And here is our array, and here is our first item, and we have the symbol, the token address, the token URI, and the token ID. Very nice. So this is how easy you can get stuff from the database and using cloud functions. In the next episode, we will extract the data contained in this JSON object and continue working on listing the items owned by the current users. So see you guys next episode, and make sure to like the video. Bye.